When do you use vibrato anyway? It can be so tricky to figure out, but in today's video, we're going to take a look at a few different contexts in which you may want to use or not use vibrato, so grab your bass and let's get started. I've done videos on how specifically to vibrate, and I will link up to those here. And this is a topic that has come up in the comments in the community, so one with a lot of subtleties and definitely worth getting into. To me, there are three different contexts that I think about with vibrato. One is as a member of the bass section. Two is as the only bass player but in an ensemble situation. And three is a legit soloist, like playing a recital solo bass or with piano. Starting off with a bass section, this is what I spend a lot of my time these days doing. These days it's subbing in the San Francisco Symphony, so I'm generally one of 8, and I am trying to fit in and blend. The older I've gotten, the more sparing I've been in my use of vibrato. When I was younger, I would get to a long whole note and I would play like that oftentimes, especially if it was forte, even if it was piano. I really like to hear the sound of my own vibrato. I enjoy my vibrato, for better or for worse. But I've realized as I've gotten older and played with more experienced players and played in more professional situations that we bass players in the section, we are blending with different things at different times, and we are setting the foundation for other instruments. So that very prominent vibrato, that can be really fun. When you have 8 bass players doing that, unless it's the right context, that can be a little bit destabilizing, and you are also oftentimes matching or doubling or complementing the low brass, who are generally not vibrating, and other instruments like that. Okay, let's take a look at an example of vibrato in a bass section. Couldn't think of a better example than the Berlin Philharmonic. If you haven't ever subscribed to Digital Concert Hall, by the way, give it a look if you want. It's one of my great things for when I'm preparing for orchestra music. So let's check this out. Got a nice little view on the bass section here. And you can see the vibrato in the upper strings, but you can see how moderate it is from the bass section. Now, part of that is that it's more of a pedal than the melody, but of course, isn't that what we often do as bass players? So they're not vibrating like super intensely like the violins or even the cellos, but it is a little bit of a different part right here, so it's all about context. And I do think that if the pedal tone is a little wobbly, that can feel kind of weird, and you are blending with the tuba, the low brass so often, so you're always wanting to think about balance and blend and matching tone, and you're not going to have the tuba vibrating like a violin. So again, it's all about context, in my opinion. See, almost no vibrato. But you can see a little bit at the end right there. There is a little bit, and the line's moving. We got to the climax, and different players are going to use different amounts. I know that when I'm subbing here in San Francisco, there will be some vibrato on longer pedal tones like that, sometimes a little more intense, depending on the style too, depending on the time period that the music was written, so context is just so important. So rather than that really wide vibrato, which might be super cool in a solo context, I think about just flavoring the sound just slightly with a little bit of vibrato. My rule of thumb is never vibrate more than the principal player, and a lot of the time I'll look and several section players will not be vibrating at all. I think that vibrato is kind of like a fingerprint, and there's personal preference both in the speed but how you use it, and when in doubt, vibrate less or maybe not at all has been my experience. And any note that I pick, I just try to color it just a little bit, not too fast, just so I can just slightly see a little bit of a waveform if I use an app like Tunable, and that's good enough for me. And if it's pianissimo or if it's just with an instrument that's not vibrating, this is so common. And even if the other strings are vibrating, sometimes we just want that pedal tone to just bulk up the bottom of the orchestra, and that's perfectly appropriate. All right, what if you're the only bass player in an ensemble? You could be playing in a chamber orchestra, you could play in a string quintet. There are so many different options, and there I think you have a lot more latitude. Now, I'm still thinking about blending with the other players, but I'm not thinking about blending with the bass section, so it's a very different thing. I'm probably not going to be in that pedal note roll like low brass as often, maybe sometimes, but I find that I use much more vibrato when I'm the only bass player, and I'm also really paying attention to the cellist. If there's a cellist in the group, or the other string players, or if I'm playing in some group where it's just bass and a bunch of wind players or something, that's super cool, not super common for me, but then I am just really sort of exploring, and when it's something that requires like real stability like that, great. But otherwise, I'll probably bring a finger a little closer to the vibrating finger to get a little bit of a wider finger, kind of a unifinger, and I can talk about that concept in a future video if you want. Just leave a comment below. But I'm going to play with a lot of different colors, and I'm going to be a little bit more proactive in my tone. I'm going to execute a little more leadership in what I'm doing because I'm the only bass player. I am leading the group from the low end in a way that's very different than if I'm one of 8, sitting in the back of a section. Here's an example of one bass player in an ensemble, and this is Tony Manzo, great bass player. This is the New Century Chamber Orchestra here in San Francisco, and I've had Tony on the podcast before. Great guy and really interesting thinker about double bass and this type of playing, and just watch how he uses vibrato. It's very similar to how the cellists use vibrato, and to enhance the notes that have the time for vibrato. He's not vibrating on the 8th notes at this point, but he is vibrating, and his vibrato is much more similar to a cellist. Now, he's going to be more of a sporting role right here, so maybe not so much vibrato. Let's see. Little bit. Ending the phrase with a little vibrato. Not so much in piano. When the phrase and the line calls for it, yeah, he brings it. I love this orchestra, so expressive, just the body language. Okay, so when it's louder dynamic, when it's a note that warrants some vibrato, he uses it. Definitely his vibrato looks much more similar to the other string players than maybe the Berlin Philharmonic example, where it really was quite different. But using it and standing out and really having this more soloistic voice, although this is Mozart, he's doubling the cello part an octave down, and it's all context. This would be very different if you were playing something from a different time period. Again, context, context, context with vibrato. Now, if it's a solo situation, of course, you have so much more latitude. It is your opportunity to explore, and I love playing with vibrato. I practice it every day. I love using it when I'm in the orchestra, when it's the right situation, but especially when I'm playing solo. I just really love exploring, and when I started out, had a very kind of tight vibrato. I learned how to loosen that up, and I've done videos about that in the past, but if you'd like to learn more about that, just let me know in the comments. I can do endless videos about that. But solo playing, all of a sudden you have so much more opportunity, and I really think of 2 kind of modes for my left hand. There's the technical, quote-unquote technical mode, and this is generalizing, where I am thinking about playing fast, digitally executing, kind of like typing or playing on a piano, and then I have expressive mode, lyrical mode, and at that point, I'm letting my fingers really come in, not really collapse, but kind of come together a little more than in technical mode, and that facilitates for me a much more pronounced vibrato. I also find that when I play really on the fingertip, that helps my vibrato a lot as well. I think that being on the bone rather than the pad enhances the sound, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm staying on my fingertips, and I've done a video about that too. There's a lot of debate in that, but just for me personally, I find that really enhances my vibrato. For solo playing, I couldn't resist using this example of Scott Dixon, the wonderful bass player in the Cleveland Orchestra and bass faculty at the Cleveland Institute of Music. I've had him on the podcast before. I just think the world of him and his bass playing. And so this is interesting. Here's an orchestral player, American orchestral player, but stepping out in a solo role. So let's just see how he uses vibrato on this warhorse of double bass solo literature, the Koussevitzky Concerto. Just lovely use to me. On most notes, not necessarily every note, but just a wonderful speed, quite different than that Berlin Philharmonic example. You can hear the oscillations more clearly in Scott's playing, but it's his approach too, of course, but definitely much more of a solo sound. I would rarely use that pronounced a vibrato when I'm trying to blend into a section. I'm sure that's true for Scott as well, but here in the solo voice is just so fitting, enhancing the expressiveness and his tone. It evolves as he plays each note. Ooh, I love that. The speed is kind of in keeping with the pace of the line for me. Not too fast, but very expressive. Evolving over each note, especially the longer notes. But on that E that he goes up to right there, even though that's a quick note, he still gives it the time, takes a little time, gives it some vibrato. I'll have this linked up in the description below. Definitely check out all of these examples. Scott, obviously, these podcast guests to dig into this is... Ooh. So Scott, it just enhances the quality so much. I just love this playing. You can check out the description for links to the full videos of all of these, and we'll see you in the next one.